Connect.
Hello, everyone. I am very nervous and I have no idea why. I hadn't checked the program and why I am after Debbie and before Lisa Smith. Someone got something wrong in there, but I am very happy to be here. And let's start. I have been an immigrant all my life. I have always moved from Colombia when I was 16, and I have learned something along the way. And that is that being seen as an other is exhausting. In the past, I have spoken a few times around the terminology otherness. And today, or maybe in the last few years, that has evolved. There's something that has changed, and I can't really quite grasp it, but I've moved towards the word togetherness. I realized after finishing writing this talk that you're going to see a lot of case studies, well, not just two, but it's almost like a personal journey from my experience that kind of translated into work. Togetherness as the antidote to otherness. Design is often seen or spoken in terms of something commercial, strategic, visual, but I also believe that it's something social, something emotional, deeply, deeply emotional. And through my experience, I realized it can be a force for healing, a force for pride, for connection. Design also doesn't sit at the outsides of society. It's woven, it's threaded. It's how we live, it's how we interact, it's how we belong. So today, I want to explore this with you. Design as a catalyst for community. Design can become a tool not just to solve problems, but to build communities. We'll unpack some of the myths. I'll walk you through 2 case studies. And basically I want to see what's possible when we design with people, not for them. The opposite of community, in my mind, this is a theory, let's put it in practice, is individualism. We have been told stories about this, about the solitary hero, about the lone genius, about the self-made man forever. We see it in the headlines that we click, in the very long list of autobiography books, in the news. The thing with this myth is that it's just that. It's a myth. There is nothing in the world that is built alone. Behind every so-called genius, there is a team. There is an entire fleet of people. There is a company. There is a culture. There is a big, big, big community. And to move towards community, we first have to unlearn this myth. So we're going to go through this journey first, this chapter 1. Because if we keep designing for the one person, if we keep designing for heroes, we'll keep designing for isolation. And this hasn't always been the case. Like early societies survived and thrived together. We know this. And they were mainly built on like cooperation and interdependence, and the celebration of individual as this thing came much earlier. So indulge me while we go the little bit of history class, but during the Renaissance period, this idea of humanism was elevated as like an individual achievement, and it helped birth incredible ideas. Don't get me wrong, there's many, many things that Renaissance gave us. The Declaration of Human Rights being one of them. But it also was a time where it began to separate the I from the we. And in the West, especially, we began to idolize the individual over the collective. So while individualism gave us many freedoms, it also disconnected us from each other. And this is the thing. When we believe in the myth of the lone genius, we give individuals a lot of power. And not necessarily in terms of money, but recognition and status and influence. And this happens in our very own industry, in the creative industry. We see it, I see it all the time. The same group of people, usually studied in the same places, the same cultural context or cultural background, they end up deciding what is good design. And that's a huge amount of power to have. And it's one that I don't consider fair, particularly neutral either. But when we center only a few voices, we erase many. And in doing so, we miss out on so much richness, so much tapestry. And I see some of you nodding because you know that this is the truth. I'm not inventing this. And this is something that I've learned personally. So let's talk a little bit about stories, because they are one of our oldest piece of technologies as humans. And stories help us see the world. They help us make sense of the world and our place in it. But when one single story dominates, it does become a cage. So I said at the beginning, I'm Colombian, and I left Colombia when I was 16, and that only meant that I realized once leaving that meant something completely different for the outside world. It just meant that I was a criminal. That's the only thing back in the day that resonated with Colombia. And that story, that label followed me to countries and decades, and I still think there's a shadow of it still lingering behind. But it also flattened everything else about me. It flattened who I was. It flattened things about my family, my country, my culture. And the thing is, we're in Hollywood, so I'm going to talk about media here and still emphasize on these stories because I feel media plays a huge role here. The stories that we choose to tell and how we tell them shape the beliefs. And these beliefs shape how we see the world. And how we see the world literally shapes what we build, what we design. So this is why I'm talking about stories and I'm going on about my personal life. Because stories do affect beliefs and affect worldview and affect world building. So if we want to design something, if we have an ambition to change something in this world, and we do need a lot of change, we need to start by changing the stories we tell and who gets to tell them. And it really comes down to this. We are facing problems that are too complex for one individual to solve. Not gonna name climate breakdown, social injustice, systemic injustice, rising inequality, you name it. Just turn the TV, turn the news on, and you'll see it. They aren't solo problems, they are collective ones. The idea that one brilliant mind or one brilliant company is able to fix this is a fantasy. We do not need more heroes. We need more networks, we need more communities, we need more coalitions. This is why we need to change our mindset. This is why we need to move from individual success to collective resilience, from isolation to solidarity. Togetherness isn't just a nice thing, it's necessary. So, if individualism is not going to help, then what? So let's talk about community. First of all, what do we actually mean by community? Because community has become a dirty word. It is used everywhere. And often when we hear someone say community, they are referring to a user, a customer, a consumer, an audience. But I know that you know that community is something else entirely, because we have all lived it in perhaps our personal lives, not so much our work life, which is a shame. But true community is built on mutual care. And a shared responsibility. It's a space where people show up for each other, not just to one another. So if we want to move beyond the myth of the solitary genius and beyond the buzzword of community, then we have to start here. What does it look like when design becomes an enabler of belonging? Because design can shape how people feel where they live. And we're going to talk about this case study for the west coast of Tasmania, and I'll explain a little bit more why. I've had the privilege of working for this project and many place branding projects since. And it's very different from working for a company because you aren't selling, you're not selling a product. The stakeholders are very different. You're selling a location, you're restoring pride, you're restoring identity. This west coast of Tassie is an island and the south of Australia, and it is a very remote place with the declining industry, so mining, and a very, very tough weather. The thing is, there are multiple ways when you ask why you pick a place to live. There are multiple ways in how people define where they live in and why. Sometimes it's quite tangible and sometimes it's quite abstract. And these conversations of understanding and underpinning why you pick this as a home are very tough conversations to have, because we can talk about trauma, we can talk about class, we can talk about power, we can talk about politics. And whilst doing this project, I felt that I was very ill-equipped to handle some of these conversations. I'm just a designer. But it really taught me that the one thing I really needed to learn was to leave every preconception, every bias, everything at the door. And I was there not to center myself in this story, but to listen. Lean in and deeply listen as to what the community was saying to me. These are some of the things that the locals of the West Coast said about the West Coast.
We're quite remote and isolated here.
The weather.
On the West Coast is predictably unpredictable.
Because it's either extremely good or extremely bad.
Be prepared, wear gumboots, bring your umbrella.
And we have gravel ovals. You know, that's how tough we need to be.
You can get skin torn off you, no worries.
If you can't buy it, you make it. If you can't make what you want, you make do.
It was quickly clear to us that the very things that made the West Coast tough were the very essence of the place, and that the West Coast of Tassie isn't for everyone. It's a place that demands that you live on the terms of the land, that this remoteness isn't an obstacle. It's a challenge, an invitation. I dare you to come here and see it for what it is. And that was quite powerful. I say now, and it's quite obvious, but it was very powerful to understand that. Over time, we co-created with the community in mind. The brand just didn't represent the place. It reflected everyone. Every single thing that you heard the community say made it to the tone of voice. Every single image that they reflected on the conversations became icons. All of the activities became part of the photography. Design here became a mirror that helped them see their own humor, which was pretty dark sometimes, their own resilience and their own pride in a new light. We did not invent this. They designed it almost for us. It designed itself. And if we're going to design something that is truly for the community, we had to build a tool for everyone to be able to use it. So we created this logo generator for small businesses in the region to be able to track, kern, use the typography, all of the illustrations, all of the films. Everything was open source and accessible for anyone in the community to use. It's very powerful. I was chatting to my husband on the way here and asked him, did we ever build guidelines? And we kind of questioned if we did, and I don't remember ever building one, because this was the power of this was the fact that it was designed with them and for them. All of these people did not need a set of instructions. It was their brand. It was their identity. It was for them to play. Since then, I have done many place branding projects. And I said it at the very beginning, it's very different from a normal brand because you are not working for a product or a company. The stakeholders are not a share few, C-suite or board members. There are thousands and thousands of people. You are doing endless interviews, official and unofficial. You set yourself almost a second address whilst you're working with them. And the relationship that you have, or the relationship that the community has with government or elected members is different than the relationship that you have with your boss. They're not paid to live there. They choose to live there. So understanding this dichotomy and social intricacies of belonging, whilst I was understanding belonging myself, I think was what made place branding just the best decade of my career thus far. Because with place branding, you are trying to create visual unity across racial, ethnic, intergenerational, and socioeconomic differences. And you're trying to find the collective identity of people, what binds them beyond geography. That's a huge, huge ask. You're never able to do that by yourself. The second case study is a little bit different. I want to unpack a little bit more of what it takes to design with and not just for. Because design often gimme. It extracts stories without any care. The internet has also exponentially exaggerated that extractive nature of design. But contribution starts with humility. It starts with listening, as I've said it before. And it centers relationships, not transactions. So we saw this clearly with the work we did for Fondation Chanel. They're the largest foundation of their kind, investing more than $100 million annually to grassroots initiatives for women and girls across the globe. But up until now, they've done this quietly. You probably have never heard of Fondation Chanel. They've done that by design, and we've met them at this point where they were ready. They were ready to be able to talk about their endeavors. Not for visibility's sake, but to better support the movements that they serve. So our work really started with a simple question. What influence does the name Chanel carry? And how can that be used to amplify, not overshadow, the voices of the grassroots leaders? Because here's the thing. This blows my mind. The places where the Fondation operates are usually where people have never heard of the brand Chanel. And if they have, they will have never been able or will never be able to afford a Chanel product. And that kind of disconnect can easily become a gap too wide to bridge, but instead we saw it as an opportunity. How can this global name of House of Chanel, so associated with exclusivity, become a platform for inclusion and amplification? Is it even possible to do so? How can we turn a legacy of prestige into a force for liberation? So we listened again. We spoke to partners, to the women movement organizers across the world, and asked them to share stories with us, and not only in language, but in songs, in musics, in objects, in sounds, in frameworks that go beyond kind of the West standardized version of sharing stories. And those insights then became our creative briefs. They became the ingredients for our brands again. Briefs that were then handed to artists of the regions that were very closely linked with the initiatives and the causes, who collaborated with Fondation Chanel to create new artistic assets, like some of the photography that you see up there. So this wasn't just branding. I felt like it was an orchestra. It was building relationships with a large network of people to be able to bring this to life. And it's rooted in context, in connection, but care above everything. And I think that's what contribution looks like. This was not about A&P's work involvement in this. This was really more about them. This is why I think it's the first time that we've ever talked about this project on stage. There is no need to have authorship here. There's no need to own anything. We're just holding the space so others can create, can be heard. And that kind of work doesn't always look flashy. It doesn't always make the headlines, but it matters deeply. Care is often seen as something soft, something invisible, something emotional, but it's also one of the most powerful forces we have. It's what builds trust. It's what sustains relationships. It's what allows communities, not just brands, to thrive. I saw this during the LA fires. I moved only 2 years ago to LA. LA is a very hard to crack city as a newly immigrant. But when the LA fires happened, I saw people opening their homes, organizing food, shelter, and rides for strangers. No one asked who you were, they asked what you needed. And that is care. That's what real community looks like. When we treat design as an act of care, we create the conditions where people feel that they belong, where they're not just included, but invited, not just seen, but heard, not just represented, but reflected. And that requires something of us as creators, as designers. It requires slowness. It requires presence. It requires deep listening. It requires stepping back, not stepping in, designing with, not for. And there's a reason why this sentence keeps on coming back in my work. All of us are smarter than any of us. Because in every project that I've leaned into community, into dialogue, into co-creation, the outcomes have always been much richer. This is a no-brainer. They've been more deeper, more meaningful than anything we could have done alone. In reaching beyond the mere sum of our collective intelligence, we reach collective wisdom. I think togetherness offers hope, and I find that quite cool. It's not just that we're more smart, that we're smarter together. It's that we are wiser, and we bring in more lived experience and more perspectives and more empathy. And I think that's what allows us to build things that last. I began this talk reflecting on otherness and what it feels like to be seen as different, as an outsider, as less than. But I've come to believe that the antidote of otherness isn't sameness, it is togetherness. And we've spent too long chasing that myth of the lone genius. But the future of design isn't about individual brilliance. It is not. No matter what the news say. It's about building the conditions, the cultures where brilliance can emerge in many forms, in many voices, through a long time. Because when we design for togetherness, we don't just make better work, we make better communities, we make better systems, and hopefully we'll design better futures. Thank you.